Dungeons and Dragons role-playing charisma. Now, in D&D Modern, charisma is really a dump stat. Unless you're playing a sorcerer or possibly a bard, where not only do you want those unlocks, you're trying to make your DC as difficult as possible. I'm trying to jack up the DC just on the core charisma. So as I increase my stats, I'm going to be putting them into charisma. Hopefully I'm starting high enough. If it's roll 3d6 or 46, if it's a point buy, I'm going the highest in charisma. Of course, I'm taking ranks and various skills. I'm going to boost up charisma on there. And then, of course, magic items and feats. If I'm playing with feats, we're going to boost that up. I mean, it's a common template. But outside of these, like, 2 or 3 character classes, you're like, look, I'm crunching the numbers. D&D Modern is just reduced down to DC checks. I want to get things as high as possible because I need to bypass that. So charisma 8, charisma 6, look, I'll role play. I'm kind of gruff and the loner and utilize that. And then from that perspective, jack up my other stats. Well, okay, raw, rules as written, RAW. That makes sense. Okay, you'll take some minuses on certain checks, right? When the DM is like, make XYZ check, everyone gets a free check in the party. And it utilizes charisma, bluff or something like that. You're like, okay, look, I'm not a charisma character with the minuses. I'm going to have to roll like a 19 or a 20. But that's okay because we have other characters in the party that can take care of that. I'm not talking about, free skill checks for everybody, but I'm talking about how these stats mold your character from a role-playing perspective. It's easy to understand if you have intelligence 18. You're like super genius. You're like talking about things that other characters can't possibly understand. Where if you have intelligence 6, you can barely formulate words. You can understand how that would impact in the game. Well, a lot of DMs just dismiss charisma as stats for those 2 character classes, sorcerer and bard. Think about what charisma represents. Personal magnetism. So I do role play charisma as a DM. I do take it into account where if we think about the face-to-face presentation of your character, right? Often what we'll see at the beginning of a campaign or at the beginning of an adventure, if some new players sit down at my table, you guys know my number 1 rule. Everyone has a seat at my table. If we're playing a game, you walk in, you want to get some D&D, look, roll up a character or pull out a character you got, sit down, you're in the game. But I will always have everybody describe how they think their character looks like. Mannerisms, maybe what your armor's wearing. Give that little role play snapshot. So when we say you're a character, you kind of have a vision of it. I take that and with your stats in my mind, because I'm playing the NPCs, I ask, okay, myself, this is how you described your character. It's going to be modified. Someone with a low charisma is just going to kind of be like, I don't want to hang around this character. They're kind of just out there, or they're putting off bad vibes, or just they have no social graces whatsoever. So before we even deal with any skill checks and dealing with negative modifiers, just that interaction aspect of an NPC giving up some information or working with the character, an extremely low charisma is going to be like, just, you're too odd. You're too out there. Like, absolutely not. Likewise, a high charisma character, before we make skill checks, they're going to be able to talk. They're going to be able to have that magnetic personality. From a role-playing perspective, absolutely charisma is important. Now, I understand, right? You can't have 16s and 18s and everything. Well, you kind of can if we're doing, godlike characters with massive point buy. But generally speaking, and I'm not talking about like AD&D stats, but generally speaking, you're going to have some high stats. You're going to have some okay stats. You can't have these high stats in everything, and you have to make choices where, hey, if I'm a fighter, I'll put that 18 in strength. I'll put that 18 into Constitution. I'll put that 16 to get a slight armor class bonus, even though I'm going heavy armor, into Dexterity. I'll stack that 12 probably into wisdom, or maybe that 13, because at least it'll get me a +1 on some wisdom saves, and fighters are primarily fortitude, but it'll help. And then, like intelligence, look, I just have to know how many swords I can carry and how many coins I can carry. And charisma, if it's a 10, that's fine. But in exploring that, people that might want to pull down their stats, and it's not kind of the classic, I'm going to play a dwarf, and I'm angry, and I'm surly, so my charisma is a 3. Like, okay, maybe, and we keep you around because you're a good fighter. But there are consequences to artificially lowering these stats. I think once you start lowering, 8 is kind of the borderline of stats, where you've got some serious disadvantages, but you can still function in the D&D world. As soon as we start lowering that, there's going to be some roleplay ramifications. At least that's how I play it. And it doesn't prevent you from making skill checks. It doesn't make you prevent you from doing those things. But before we get to them, there's going to be a little bit of a barrier. And of course, this plays out differently in every system of D&D. If we look at Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, charisma is not a dump stat. And I'm not talking about you need it to qualify for certain character classes. I'm talking about dealing with retainers and henchmen, which is a massive part of AD&D. I pushed that up to the AD&D playlist, understanding that perspective. It's not like D&D Modern where you just throw some gold on the table and the person follows you blindly. Your charisma and your interaction is huge. Likewise, wandering monsters. Not all monsters attack. So sometimes monsters will be wandering. You'll be wandering in a dungeon. You come across and there's a kind of charisma type check to see their reaction. Those modifiers are literally life and death. They're massive. So yeah, I'd like 18s and everything, but if I'm going to artificially reduce things depending on the system of D&D I'm playing, I don't know if I want a 3 or a 6 charisma. 8, we're starting to feel the effects. I'd probably like to keep it around 9 and 10, which means I'm not getting bonuses, but I'm not getting penalties. It's going to come down to the dice roll, but I'm not handicapped in that perspective. Your perspective as a player, as a DM, is charisma the ultimate dump stat? And I understand, right? We've only got a fixed amount of points, or we've got to slot in some good rolls, but be aware or be careful of reducing charisma down so low that literally it's going to get you into trouble at different points of the game, and you might not have a response for it.